Hello everyone, welcome to the second in a four-part series of webinars brought to you by Presentation Guru. My name is John Zimmer. I'm one of the co-founders of Presentation Guru. A little bit about me, I'm from Canada but now live just outside Geneva, Switzerland. I'm a lawyer by training. I did a lot of corporate commercial litigation and environmental law for a big law firm in Canada before moving to Switzerland, where I worked for almost 20 years for the United Nations and the World Health Organization. But about 5.5 years ago, I walked away from that to do what I do now, which is public speaking, presentation skills training, keynote addresses, and moderating events. Public speaking is a big passion of mine, and it's always a delight to work with people who want to improve their level of public speaking. And with me today is one of my co-founders of Presentation Guru, Jim Harvey. Jim.
Thank you, John. Hello, everybody. My name's Jim Harvey. I'm an entrepreneur that has built businesses helping organizations sell their stuff. And a lot of that means writing speeches, creating presentations, and helping trainers and speakers connect with audiences all over the world. And I'm delighted to be here today. And the subject of today's podcast, which is about making your words sing, is a subject that's really close to my heart.
Well, that subject and a whole lot more can be found on our website, presentationguru.com, presentation-guru.com. And it is a news magazine, and we have the word guru in there, but I am certainly not a guru. Jim is not a guru. Really, the concept of the guru is that the entire community makes up the guru, because the way the magazine is set up, is that most of the articles on the site are contributions from people, dozens and dozens of other people besides ourselves. And what that means is that it brings different viewpoints, different experiences, different perspectives, which we think makes for a richer reading experience. So Jim, let's go into a little more detail. You already touched on it, but let's go into a little more detail about what we are going to talk about in this webinar.
Thank you, John. Today's podcast builds on last week's, and there are three things that presenters of every level of experience need to be working on constantly to build their skill. One, the ability to create a strong story that connects with an audience. Two, creating really simple visual aids that help them illustrate and emphasize. And then thirdly, the performance element. And the best presenters tend to say the words as themselves with skill. Today, we're building on what we started last week. Once you've got the fundamentals of creating a story, then you want to make the words interesting and memorable to an audience. And in a couple of minutes, John is going to explain to us what we think are the 9 most powerful rhetorical tools that are designed to do exactly this, to help you create a strong and memorable story that sticks in the minds of your audience. And there are 3 parts to doing that. Of course, you have to know really clearly what you want to say. Once you know what you want to say, you have to be able to take the essence, the real jewels out of that as sound bites. And once you've identified the key messages, then you have to make the words sing. And one of the things that we talk about is if you can't explain your argument in a single sentence, then you don't know what it is. And so many times, the reason that presentations aren't clear and the sound bites don't work and the language doesn't work is because the presenter hasn't spent enough time thinking about what it is that they're saying.
It's so true. It reminds me of the quote by Albert Einstein. He said, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough.
When we work with sometimes very experienced speakers on their speeches, it's the first exercise we often do. It may be a 4-hour speech or a 5-day conference, but that discipline of challenging yourself to explain what it is that you're arguing for in a single sentence adds light to the rest of the creative process. So, once you identify what you want to say, you have to identify sound bites. Philip Collins, one of our friends and colleagues, was Tony Blair's speechwriter for over 10 years when he was the UK Prime Minister. He thinks about it like this: as a speechwriter, you have to understand that the resonant phrase is the one that sticks in the memory. In politics, it's going to be the one or two phrases that journalists will write down in their notebooks and use as headlines the next day. In business speeches, it's exactly the same principle. And if those one or two facts or phrases are going to be the things that people remember, you have to make sure that the words work. Dead, and lots of business communication is completely soul dead. No one will remember what you said. So this podcast, using classic rhetorical techniques, is about helping all of us get better at making our words sing so that we're not forgotten. If you want to make your words sing, create a strong story, know what you want to say, identify sound bites, then work hard to make the words sing. You want your words to be memorable, repeatable, and tweetable.
I like to think of rhetorical devices as the spice to your speech, just like the spices you see in the image. There are dozens and dozens of rhetorical devices, and each one used properly and in the right combination can be incredibly effective. However, you want to make sure you don't overuse them, just like a spice. If you have a jar of cinnamon or ginger or cumin or whatever, and you dump the whole jar into your meal, you're going to ruin the meal. It's the same with rhetorical devices, just enough and in the right mix to enhance the flavor of your speech. And although there are dozens of these devices, Jim and I have picked 9, which we think are very effective and also relevant for any speech or presentation that you might have to give today. So let's take a look at them. The first one is Anaphora. Anaphora is simple, Anaphora is effective, Anaphora will make an impact. Now that, what I just said, is an example of Anaphora. It's the repetition of a word or a phrase at the beginning of successive sentences or clauses. And to look for an example from a famous speech, we can't do much better than Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech. And as you see here, I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today. And you feel the power of this phrasing, this repetition of I have a dream, I have a dream, I have a dream. It's like a wave that keeps coming over the audience.
It's a really good point, John. And I think let's just go back to real fundamentals here. The deliberate repetition of a key idea will carry the weight of the whole message when it's done well as it's done here. Sometimes we try too hard to get people to remember, whereas what we're really trying to get you to do today is to make your words unforgettable. The deliberate hypnotic repetition of a key phrase or idea is a simple technique that we should all be comfortable with using.
And for those watching the webinar, we invite you to take a moment or two and think of a speech or presentation that you have to give or that you'd like to give, or perhaps even one that you've already worked on and given in the past. And think of a way that you can write an anaphora. Try and come up with an anaphora, whatever your topic is. It can be health, it can be IT, it can be business related. See what you can do to come up with an anaphora for your speech. The next device is epistrophe. When you use epistrophe well, you can also make an impact. And epistrophe is, I like to call it the twin brother or sister of anaphora. It's the repetition of a word or a phrase, but this time at the end of successive sentences or clauses. So just as anaphora is at the beginning, epistrophe comes at the end. And let's take a look at another example. Barack Obama's famous "Yes, we can" speech. He talked about generations of Americans who have responded with a simple creed that sums up the spirit of a people: yes, we can. It was a creed written to the founding documents that declared the destiny of a nation: yes, we can. It was whispered by slaves and abolitionists: yes, we can. It was sung by immigrants: yes, we can. You see the same power of repetition, only this time it's moved to the end.
It's like a pop song, isn't it? Every pop song has a chorus or a riff, you know, a musical and a verbal repeated hook that draws people in. It's beautifully done here.
Yeah, and you know, even these days in my corporate trainings, when I talk about a foundational phrase and I will show a picture of Obama, everybody immediately says, yes, we can. Yeah. It just sticks like glue to the brain, which is great. Which is what
and just for political balance, you know, we can think of the current president of the United States. I'm not going to say the word because I don't need to. We can all remember it. In great political speeches, going back to what Phil Collins said, great sales messages, great advertisements on television, this deliberate use of a key phrase, a soundbite, is brilliantly done.
Absolutely. Whether you love them or hate them, "Make America Great Again" is something that everybody knows. And again, same exercise for those of you viewing. Think of a speech or presentation. Try and write an epistrophe. Now, the next device is what I like to call the hammer of rhetorical devices: Epizeuxis. It is powerful, powerful, powerful. And that in itself is an epizeuxis. It's the repetition of the same word or words in immediate succession. So this is a different, whereas anaphora and epistrophe are repetition, but in a much more subtle and almost poetic way. Epistrophe is very blunt. There's no pretense about it. The speaker is driving home the point. And to take an example, Jim earlier mentioned Phil Collins, and who is the speechwriter of Tony Blair. There's a very famous speech, you can see it on YouTube, in which Tony Blair, who was then leader of the opposition, was challenging John Major in the House of Commons. And Major has just finished saying something and sits down, and Blair stands up and he says, "Isn't it extraordinary that the Prime Minister of our country can't even urge his party to support his own position? Yeah, weak, weak, weak." And that was the headline on the newspaper the following day.
And you could almost guarantee that Phil and Tony Blair and his strategists would have expected the speech and would have created that soundbite in advance. And I think it's a really good lesson for us. Performers like you to believe that their great words come out of thin air.
Yep.
But they don't. They come off paper. And if you want to get better at being remembered, just think about the things that we're talking about here. Weak, weak, weak. Or in the context of this, prepare, prepare, prepare.
Yep. And if we want to take a look at the current situation that we are all living with COVID-19, Dr. Tedros, the Director General of the World Health Organization, what is his phrase? Test, test, test. That's going to be one of the keys to getting a handle on this virus, and he's very blunt about it, and it's a very effective way to get the message across.
And when we talk about these rhetorical techniques, they don't have to be delivered like a politician, because you can think in a conversational tone, in a small meeting room with very senior executives. You're not going to pound your fist and say these things, but you can say it like, there's one thing that we need to do here today, and that is test, test, test. Same impact, but different tone.
It's an excellent point, and it goes to show that you can only be yourself. Authenticity is hugely important when you speak. But no matter what your speaking style, you can still use each of these rhetorical devices.
Yeah.
So again, take a moment or two, and think of an epizeuxis that might work for one of your speeches or presentations. Now, this next device is, I will confess, my favorite rhetorical device, Anadiplosis. This is when you begin a sentence or clause by repeating the last word or words of the previous sentence or clause. To make it more simple, A leads to B, B leads to C, C leads to D. And it has this effect of linking one event or one thing to another with this certain sense of inevitability. And we have a couple of examples for this one that put it in, that show what I'm talking about from the movies. And the first one, it's one of my favorite, and it gives me a chance to do my world famous, at least in my own mind, Yoda impression. When Yoda said, "Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering." Is that good, Jim?
I'm speechless, but I'm really looking forward. It's very good, actually. I'm really looking forward to your Joaquin Phoenix impression.
No. I stopped. For me, Yoda is the alpha and omega. But you can see in this sentence. So fear leads to anger, anger to hate, hate to suffering. And again, it has this building momentum, because his whole point is, if you go down the path of the dark side, your fear is going to ultimately lead you to suffering. And it's going to do so through this chain of events. The other example is Joaquin Phoenix in Gladiator, when he talks about the general who became a slave, the slave who became a gladiator, the gladiator who defied an emperor. This is when he comes face to face with Russell Crowe's character in the movie. A very powerful technique. And in a business context, you can see how this device could be used rather easily. You know, in all kinds of situations. For example, where a team leader wants to motivate her team, she might say something like, "If we work hard, we will win this contract. And if we win this contract, we will show them what we can do. And if we show them what we can do, they will hire us again and again." And you see how you can bring this device from the movies, from ancient Greece, right into the corporate boardroom. So again, take a moment, think of something from your experience, and see if you can then bring this, write an Anadiplosis that relates to your speech or presentation. Now, the next device, it's called Antimetabole. And this is a subset of another device known as chiasmus. Chiasmus comes from the letter chi in the Greek alphabet, which is like an X. It's a crossing. And as you can see on the screen, it's the repetition of the same word or phrases in reverse order. So to show you what we mean, we have John F. Kennedy's famous speech where he says, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." Another example that pops to mind is the motto of the Three Musketeers: "All for one and one for all." And that's very nice. It's this reinforcement of an idea that goes two ways. So a famous example would be John F. Kennedy's speech, in which he says, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." And another example that comes to mind is the slogan, the motto of the Three Musketeers: "All for one and one for all." So you have this reinforcement that actually it goes in two directions, but the two together, they complement each other quite nicely.
And we've got some examples coming in from the audience here, which is great. Eric says, "Say what you mean and mean what you say." George GCJ says, "The difference is quality. Quality makes a difference."
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, and Dante Licona says, "All for health and health for all, for advocating for universal health coverage." And Jenny Moreau says, "Say what you mean what you say, don't say it mean," which is a really nice extension of a well-known phrase. Very nice.
It really is. It really is. Christina.
So, something a little playful, like ask not what Toastmasters can do for you, ask what you can do for Toastmasters.
There you go.
You could also spin that around, couldn't you? Ask not what you can do for Toastmasters. Ask what Toastmasters can do for you.
So again, about 45 seconds. If people want to try and come up with an antimetabole.
Okay, let's give it a go, John.
Here we go. I'm going to cheat because I have a book full of these, which we're going to share a little later on. But from a military speech, you stood up for America. Now America must stand up for you. Oh, and of course, yes, Billy Ocean. When the going gets tough, the tough get going. So what do we have here? We on the chat. Let me just check here. Eric, say what you mean and mean what you say. That's from a song, One Thing Leads to Another. Isn't that, who was that? I think I saw them in concert years ago. And then George says, the difference is quality. Quality makes a difference. Excellent. And Dante, all for health and health for all.
Very good.
All excellent. Great examples.
Very good.
Now this next one is a staple, a pillar of rhetoric, the tricolon. And it's essentially 3 words or phrases or sentences that are parallel in structure, length, or rhythm. And so as an example, a very famous example, Julius Caesar, I came, I saw, I conquered. And we see examples of this throughout history, you know, from the French, liberté, égalité, fraternité. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And Jim and I were having this discussion about what is it. There's something about the number 3 that is magical in terms of public speaking. We say 2 is a comparison, 4 is a list, 3 is rhetoric. And there's something about 3 that just makes, it allows for, again, a bit of rhythm, and often it allows for setting the third thing apart to catch people's attention. And you see this in joke telling. You know, how many times you hear, you know, 3 men walk into a bar, A, B, C. It could be 3 nationalities or 3 professions or 3 whatever. And the joke is always on the third one. A tip for using tricolons, they are especially effective when the third one is actually slightly longer than the first 2. So think again, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. If you put them in any other order, we're here for life, the pursuit of happiness, and liberty, or the pursuit of happiness, life, and liberty, it wouldn't sound as good. From Shakespeare, another one that comes to mind is in Julius Caesar. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. So friends, 1 syllable, Romans 2, but countrymen is 3. The longest one comes at the end. And if you would have reversed it, starting with the whole country, then down to the city, then to the intimate friends, even though friends are the closest, it still would have been the same. Countrymen, Romans, friends. No, friends, Romans, countrymen. Anything you want to add, Jim?
No, John. I think that's perfect.
It's not just perfect. It's perfect, amazing, and wonderful. That's what you're supposed to say.
John, could you just flip the slide one back so I can see the definition again?
Of course.
Tricolon. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. So Ranjit is saying, we thought we outsourced, we think, we thought we outsourced, we think further. Okay? And it's true. We thought, we outsourced, we think further, and think further is longer. Dante, at work I explain what our social media objectives are with 3 words. We want presence, consistency, shareability. Apples, oranges, and lemons. All good. And Elizabeth, I listened, I learned, I connected. Very nice. And again, listened, learned, connected. 3 at the end. Lovely, lovely. Let's keep going. Metaphor. Metaphor is a term that I suspect most, if not all of you, have heard before. It's comparing 2 things by stating that one is the other. And Jim and I did this at the beginning of the presentation when we said that rhetorical devices are the spice that livens up your speech. That is a metaphor. A version of a metaphor called a simile is when you use the word like or as. I'm as hungry as a horse. It's like walking on sunshine. I don't know. An example of metaphor, we have a couple of examples here. The English proverb, the eyes are the window to the soul. And again, if we go back to Martin Luther King's speech, which is really, it's really worth taking a look at the script of the speech to see what's in there. But we refuse to believe that the bank of justice is bankrupt. And later on, he talks about insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. It's a very powerful device. Metaphor. Analogy. So Lisa Marie, you're asking a question. Analogy. Question?
Sorry, the reason I put it on a question mark is because I think that last figure was really an analogy because it was quite extensive.
Oh, I see what you're saying. With the Martin for the King, let me put it back here. He is drawing an analogy, but I would also say it is a metaphor as well. When he talks about, you know, the bank, let me just move the chat. That's the thing with Zoom, everything covers my slides. You know, the bank of justice. So he's, for me, it's also a metaphor. The vaults of opportunity. Christina is saying, yeah, the fire in his belly fueled his passion for reformation. Perfect. Okay. Any other examples of metaphor that people care to share? Julia, life is like a rainbow. Bill, sous vide is the magic sauce in the kitchen.
I think metaphor is one of those things that people use it so naturally. Everybody, from children, you know, my face is burning. No, it's not. It's a child using a metaphor to add meaning. It's so common. And I think sometimes what happens when we're speaking is we almost take metaphor out because we change our syntax, we change our words and our language into a business language. And I think metaphor, you know, simile, analogy is a beautiful natural human thing. What I teach, Eva, is like double espresso. Beautiful. Elizabeth, learning is food from Eva. My heart is broken. I hope that's just an example, not the truth. Eva, yeah, lovely. I'd like to know how what you teach is like double espresso. Sous vide is the magic sauce in the kitchen. That's a good one.
I don't know what sous vide actually is. I was wondering, is it actually sauce? But I don't.
Slow cooking in a bag.
Ah, okay, there you go.
Sous vide. I don't know what sous vide. I don't know under something. I don't know. But yeah, it's a very sophisticated cooking technique.
Scrum is the oil in our cogs.
Yeah, in a vacuum.
Right.
Beautiful.
Let's keep going to the final 2, and they are related. But these, I find, are two techniques, two rhetorical tools that can be very effective, especially in business presentations, but elsewhere as well. The first is Hypophora. This is when you ask a question and you answer it. So it's not quite a rhetorical question, but you're asking a question and then you are giving the answer. You're not expecting an answer from the audience. So if we take a look from, again, I gotta move this, from Bill Clinton, when he said, you know, what is George Bush doing about our economic problems? He's raised taxes on the people driving pickup trucks and he's lowered taxes on the people riding in limousines. And that was a brilliant, the whole thing is very rhetorical, but this is a great example of Hypophora. You ask a question and then you answer it. So again, you know, I'm just thinking of the examples that Ranjit has been sharing. You know, what is the solution? The solution is Scrum or agile thinking or whatever. This is how you could bring this into a business presentation. So you ask a question and then you answer it. So how do I know this? I just do. Brilliant. That raises a whole bunch of other questions, but that is Hypophora. How do I know this? I just do. How do you ensure that all your cooking is safe from bacteria? Sous vide. Terrific. And I love that the answer is very short and the question is longer. It's a nice juxtaposition. Why did I say so? Because I wanted to score a point.
It's a good one.
A couple more seconds. Okay, we will move on to the last one. And the last one has the longest, most complicated name, which is Procatalepsis. And it's like Hypophora, but in this case, you are anticipating an objection that somebody in the audience might make or a challenge you might receive, and then you are immediately rebutting it. Now, when I practiced law in Canada, this is something that lawyers are taught very early, especially when you're like me, if you're a litigation lawyer, you're going into court. If you were going to court, it was because each side had good arguments. If only one side had good arguments, the case never went to court, it always settled. So if I was the moving lawyer, meaning the lawyer who spoke first, I would have already received the written materials from my opponent and he or she would have received my written materials as well. So we would know more or less what each other's arguments were. Many times I would have 3 key arguments, 4 key arguments to make to the court in favor of my client. But I knew that my opponent opposing counsel might have 1 or 2 key arguments. And if I was the first lawyer to speak, I would always, always mention those arguments as part of my argument. Why? Because if I were silent, then opposing counsel would say, now, my lord, Mr. Zimmer has told you this and this, but he didn't tell you this. He didn't tell you about X. And by saying it that way, it would look bad on me. It was like I was either trying to hide it or ignore it. So what I would do is I would say something like, now, my lord, my friend here is undoubtedly going to tell you about X. And at first blush, it looks serious, but let me tell you why this doesn't apply. And I would make my case. Then when my friend, the lawyer for the opposing side, raised point X, it wasn't as powerful because I'd already mentioned it. I'd already stolen his thunder, as we say. So if we see an example from a speech from Barack Obama, where he said, if you ask many opponents of this law, which was the Affordable Care Act, exactly what they do differently, their answer seems to be, well, let's go back to the way things used to be. You can't just say the health system working with 41 million people who didn't. You can't just say the health system was working with 41 million people who didn't have health insurance. So he is addressing an argument. And for you, as you are, if you have a presentation, a business presentation where you know there's going to be some challenge, it's a very effective technique to address, not in a hard-hitting way, in a very respectful way, but to acknowledge. Now, I know that there are some concerns with this proposal. There are concerns about costs, there are concerns about timing. However, let me tell you why these shouldn't be concerns concerning with regard to costs, and then you address them. So it's a very powerful technique. I see, Jim, I've seen some comments coming in. I don't know if you want to field those.
Yeah. And I know you're going to say that the weather is too bad to do this, but I say that there is no bad weather, merely inappropriate clothing. From Oliver. Thank you, Oliver.
Lisa Marie.
Lisa Marie, I can hear what you're thinking. I couldn't possibly have the latest statistics, yet here are the latest data from a reputable source. That's good. From Bill, you may have heard that people of color do not get COVID-19. The hospitals prove otherwise.
Excellent. All very good. All very good. And, you know, when you use a device like Procatalepsis to address these arguments, if you can do it in a way that shows that you've actually listened to, thought about, and taken into consideration the concerns of people who disagree with you, it is invariably better. When a manager or a leader has to share bad news with her staff, if she does so in a way that shows that she has listened to and thought about the objections to what's going to happen, even if people are not necessarily happy with her decision, they are going to be less unhappy, because in my experience, what I have found is that one of the things people crave is the knowledge that they've actually been listened to and that people have considered their point of view. George asked a question. Is it more impactful at the start or at the end of a presentation? George, I would say it's more impactful at the start. I think we're talking in the abstract here, so you have to, of course, structure every presentation with a proper opening that leads into it. But acknowledging at the outset that you know that there are some opposing viewpoints on an issue, that you've thought about them, and that you are going to be addressing them in the course of your presentation will go some way to setting the stage for people. It doesn't mean that when the questions come that they won't still ask the same questions, but I think it's better to do this at the front end of your speech rather than waiting until the end, because then people might get, depending on how long you're speaking, they might start getting frustrated. Jim, any thoughts that you have on that?
No, I was thinking while you were speaking, actually, if you ask me, I mean, yeah, potentially, I suppose you could use it as the final full stop in a sales pitch, for example. And I was just thinking, you know, let's just say you know that your key competitor has pitched just before you, and you know what their argument against you is going to be. So maybe you could use something like this and say, so if you ask, what's the difference between us and them? I would say just one thing. I don't know, something like that. If it was, you know, yeah, something like that. You could use it as a final full stop.
Good. There are, George, the nice thing about speeches and presentations that I found, they're like Lego, to use a metaphor. They're like Lego in that you can construct them different ways and they will work. You just have to see with this particular speech to this particular audience on this particular occasion, is it better to start with or end with it?
Mm. And I was thinking in another metaphor, and I think this probably, John, I think that this moves us on, doesn't it, to the next?
It does move us on. Yep.
To the next point is in preparing for the for this show, we were thinking about metaphors and whatever, and we thought about sculpture as a really nice metaphor for the kind of things that we're talking about. In that, you know, what does a sculptor start with? A sculpture starts with a block of marble. 20 tons, 2 meters by 2 meters by 3 meters. And to quote Michelangelo, when somebody said, how do you carve an angel out of the stone? Michelangelo, as an Italian sculptor would, said, I just see the angel in the stone and I set it free. Right? I think it's not as simple as that, is it? The first thing you do with a big piece of stone is you knock big chunks off it. And for me, that's the start of creating a strong story, is getting an argument together. You know what you want to say. That's gathering this information and putting it in a general form, a general shape. But like any sculptor then, what you do is you identify specific areas of this thing that will be the focus of an audience's attention, and you work on those and you sharpen those. And then the final thing that you do is polish it. You know, you go over it so every surface is as smooth as silk and as real as skin. And that's really what we're talking about here. We wanted to share 9 of what we think are the most immediately usable rhetorical tools that go back thousands of years, that were documented by the Greeks and named by the Greeks, which in some ways makes them inaccessible, to say, look, if we're helping other people communicate more effectively, let's help them do 3 things. But it's a waste of time to add the rhetorical flourish if the argument doesn't work. And it's a waste of time adding rhetorical flourish if you're not really sure what the key messages are. So we wanted to do that and say, right, if you know what you want to say really clearly, if you've got sound bites that you can use, here's 9 things that you can do to make the words sing. And that's what we wanted to do. So thank you for that, John. And we're thinking about, you know, what could you do next? What could you do next in order to take this somewhere? Well, we thought there were 3 things. There's something that not many people do. It used to be a staple of schools. If you think about your favorite speech, be it from a Spanish politician, be it from an American pastor, be it from a 12-year-old Swedish humanitarian who's trying to change the world, look at the speeches that they've used and actually copy them out. Don't just read them, copy them out, because there's something about touching the words and writing them down that brings some of these rhetorical techniques into life. John, do you want to say something about that?
Well, it reminds me of, and I can't remember his name, an author, modern author, who, when he was starting out, he sat down at a typewriter and he had his copy of F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby, and he typed it, he typed out The Great Gatsby in full from start to finish, because he wanted to feel what it was like to write a classic novel. And this idea of reading and copying great speeches, on my blog, and I will share the links, I've analyzed a number of speeches. I think there's about 30, 40 of them on my blog so far, where I look at different rhetorical devices that people have used, different techniques, things that I liked, things that I think could have been done better, just my opinion. But this is how you become better and find your own style when it comes to speaking. You watch what people do and then try things out, but make them yours. It doesn't mean you have to do everything the way Margaret Thatcher said it, or the way Barack Obama said it, or the way whomever said it. It's you. And so try these things out, practice them, learn from others.
That's great. The second thing that we thought about, the second thing we could do is, you know, watch some of those videos. I think YouTube is a fabulous resource of the greatest speeches in history. Now, I was actually listening to the Gettysburg Address the other day, and seeing an actor say those words, or hearing an actor speak those words that we have no idea about, actually brings that to life as well, just to see how the argument is formed and how the sentences are formed, and where they use, great speech writers use those techniques. We were thinking, if there's one book that you can read, and we'll post a link to the book as well in the materials that we send you. John, you recommended this book. Would you like to tell us a little bit about that?
It is an excellent book called The Elements of Eloquence by a guy named Mark Forsyth. It's all about rhetorical devices, and you might think, oh my God, this is going to be the most boring book in the world, but it's not. He writes He has a very light style, very humorous writing style. He takes examples not just from great literary works, but from songs by people like the Rolling Stones and Alanis Morissette. And the chapters are very short. I think the longest chapter is maybe 6 to 8 pages. Most are shorter, and you can read the book. It's the kind of book that you can pick up and you don't have to read it from start to finish. You can just jump in to a particular rhetorical device. If you just want to learn about that, you can spend 10 minutes with it and you'll learn something. So it's a very accessible book.
Just a few comments actually that have come in. Sculpture metaphor, very useful. Thanks. Okay, that's great. George, it's no problem at all. Lisa Marie, any warnings about mixed metaphors? John, would you like to answer this?
Yes, don't mix metaphor. I'm trying to think of,
See, I don't mind. While you're thinking, John, I think, again, it's deliberate or it's accidental. I think accidentally mixed metaphors can cause an audience problems, but deliberately mixed metaphors for humor, for humorous purposes, or for, to say the same thing. As we've talked about sculpture, we've talked about spice, and we've talked about music as a metaphor for the things that we're talking about today. Now, you'll decide whether that works or not. But I think as George just said there, sometimes if one metaphor doesn't work for somebody and you only use that metaphor, then it can be a less powerful speech. Whereas if finally the third metaphor about sculpture is more useful than any others. So I think just be aware if you are mixing your metaphors. And I don't think there should be any rule like it about it.
Janet asks, any advice for non-native speakers? And I presume, perhaps incorrectly, that, well, no, I think this would apply for people, non-native speakers speaking English, but also native English speakers speaking in a foreign language. And I would say that, obviously I think a lot of what you can do with a language depends upon how comfortable you are with it, how comfortable you feel speaking in front of others. But one good thing about English, and I think there are many, I think it's a fabulous language, but one good thing about English is that it is principally a monosyllabic language, which means that most words in English are really just one syllable. And if you read good writing in newspapers like, for example, The Economist, which is brilliant writing in English, most sentences are short sentences with the occasional long one to add a bit of flourish. I would say, if in terms of rhetorical devices in a language that is not your mother tongue, try one in your next presentation. Work on it, practice it, see that it comes out the right way. Check it if you're not sure with a native speaker. Ask, does this make sense? You can get feedback before you go in to actually deliver the speech. But don't overdo it. It's the same advice that I would give as well to native speakers speaking in English. Try it out, see how it works, see how people like it. Don't overdo it.
There are a few languages where metaphor doesn't exist, but they're very small and usually ancient languages. But I think great words translated from Chinese into English or translated from English into German, there's lots that we can learn from all of that great writing. The only warning, I think, is just cultural sensitivity, because story that works well in England, where we might have looser ideas about, I don't know, religion or marriage or something, than in a more conservative culture, can get you into trouble. I think the language, the idea of metaphor in language works. But the only place I've seen of myself and other people have got into trouble is by assuming that the actual example will work in exactly the same way. So just be aware of cultural differences.
And if I could just add, now this is not exact 100% on point, but I think there's also a caution that needs to be shared with native speakers or people who speak excellent English, who are speaking in English to an audience where the majority of people are not native speakers. And one thing I learned, coming from Canada, being a native English speaker, having worked for years in the UN system, I learned how to adapt my language to a multicultural audience. My English, when I speak to a multicultural audience, is not the same as the language I would speak with my friends and family members when I go back to visit them in Canada. There's no jargon. I speak a little more slowly. I try to speak clearly, and I try to use simple words. And this is a problem that many English speakers don't realize they have. They are speaking along in English. They think everybody understands, but they've done studies. NATO has done studies, and a lot of English speeches are lost on the audiences because the speakers did not adapt their English to the audience. So that's something to keep in mind from the other perspective.
One really interesting example as well. I was in Geneva 3 or 4 years ago listening to an American talk to an international group of people from all over Europe and the Middle East and Asia. And he was a very good speaker. He had a very interesting presentation. But his repeated metaphor was baseball. Okay, and the big challenge was that virtually nobody in that audience understood what a batting average of 0.3 meant. And so just that little lack of, but if you understand the audience really well, then you'll tend not to make that mistake. I think in this case, you know, the person hadn't traveled widely in Europe and didn't realize that baseball isn't a world game. It's a game that works in 50 states in North America. But I've seen French people do it. I've seen English people do it. I've seen, you know, all kinds of cultures just assume to some degree that everybody in the audience is. Dante, the Financial Times, Michael Skapinka, great name, wrote this piece last year. That's brilliant. Jenny, yeah, know your audience, absolutely. Yeah, Bill, on the, you know, the delivery side, remember the power of the pause.
Bill is so right. I think one of the top things that anybody can learn to become a better speaker is to become comfortable with the silence. Mark Twain said it best. He said, the right word may be effective, but no word was ever as effective as a rightly timed pause. Because the pauses give your audience just that micro break to think about and then internalize what you've said. And you as a speaker look much better, you look much more confident standing on stage and being completely comfortable with saying something and then just looking at the audience for a few seconds without saying anything else.
Okay, the fourth much weighted element of this, the last page is an international phrase. I'm not exactly sure what it means, but in English it means just flipping well do it. Sometimes we know these things, but we don't try them. And when we try them, they work. And sometimes they don't work, but we've tried them. If we leave it simply as intellectual knowledge without trying it, some of the value of this kind of stuff can be lost. So those are our 4 thoughts. And what we're going to do, for those who want to stay, we're planning on finishing in sort of 10 minutes, but it'd be really interesting to get some thoughts from you. You can write it in the notes, you can in the chat thing, you can share it with us verbally, but just give us a bit of feedback. What's been relevant for you? What's been interesting and useful? And are there any observations or questions that you've had about this and how we could do it more effectively and more differently? So just those 3 questions.
Ava's asked, what is JFDI?
Just do it, Ava.
You can use your imagination for the F. At first when I saw it, I thought it was an E, and I thought he was saying Jedi, like Yoda was a Jedi, but no, it's JFD. Yeah.
So Ava, I was being culturally narrow there. Yeah, just do it.
Thank you for that, Bill. We wanted to make this one as interactive as possible, so we're going to be thinking how we can do that with future ones. Christina would love to talk about humor at one point. Humor is great. That could be a whole session as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. And John and I, John is a stand-up comedian. I have written comedy and do stand-up comedy as well. And yeah, we'd be happy to do something about that in the future.
If you're ever nervous about giving a speech, do stand-up comedy. You'll be fine after that.
But the thing that I've learned about doing stand-up comedy is actually the principles are exactly the same. Mm. You have to understand your audience, and every audience is different. You have to understand who you are, and your comedy has to come from you. It has to be sincere. Because if you're a 50-year-old man and your comedy is about being a 20-year-old boy, it just doesn't work. And then crafting a comic set is simply about writing and using some of these things and testing them and finding out what works for the audience. It's really interesting.
Great. Oh, thank you for all the comments, everybody. I'm just going, Oliver, Eva, Dora, Dante. I want to ask Aurora a question, so let's see if she was picking. So Aurora, you said it was clear, straight to the point, and inspiring. What device did you just use?
And there we go. 3 stages are simple, not easy, and the tools are very useful. And if people want us to do more detail on the 3 stages, then we can do that in future as well.
That's a good point. I like, Alan, what you say. They're simple, but not easy, and it's true. It reminds me of a legal quote that I learned when I first started in law school from the American Chief Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, and he said something like, I couldn't care less about the simplicity on this side of complexity, but I would give my right arm for the simplicity on the far side of complexity. And what he meant is that legal cases are often complex, and you have to get into the complexity, but you have to come out on the other side and simplify it. And simplicity, it's such a powerful technique in speaking, but you have to work at it to get something simple, to distill it down to its essence.
But I also think as well, don't be afraid to repeat something, to do the same thing in 3 ways with complicated issues. The fact that people are confused and haven't got it the first time doesn't mean that you're bad or they're bad. It means that sometimes the greatest learning comes out of confusion. So, don't be afraid of tackling complicated things, but like we've done here, give an example, get people to practice, allow people to get it wrong, give them feedback, do those kind of things. Thank you, Dante. It's brilliant. So we will upload the video of this podcast. We'll share the notes that people have because they get recorded as well. And we'll put together a book after the 4 podcast just to summarize some of the things that we've talked about in all of these things. You'll have our email addresses, you'll have our contact addresses and websites. And if there's anything that you want to know, any way that we can help you, just let us know, because the reason we're doing these things is because we run Presentation Guru because we believe that the guru is the community. As somebody said here today, we've had this, Bill, I think it was, we've shared some things with you and you've shared with each other and we've learned. So at Presentation Guru, we genuinely believe that this community of professionals is the guru. And if any of you have an area of expertise or a subject that you'd like to write on for Presentation Guru, let us know, because we've published 377 long form articles over the last 4 years, and most of them from different people. And if you're interested in doing that, then please let us know. So thank you for your time. It will be on our YouTube channel, Sylvia. We'll post it probably by Friday. And it'll be on our websites, and we'll tweet it, and we'll do it like that. So thank you for your time. Thank you. Stay safe. John, over to you to finish.
Yes, I was just to say, Lisa Marie's asked, where do we sign up for the next round? It's the same link as you signed up for this one on the Eventbrite page. On the right-hand side, you can change the event. You can select which event. I believe that the next one is full up for now, but Jim, we might have 1 or 2 for spots. Maybe we can figure out.
We've got, in the same way but we keep a few spots back because, unfortunately, I think today we had about 30 people that didn't attend. So booked a ticket and didn't attend. We asked people to cancel if they're not going to attend. So yes, there are a few tickets left. If you want a ticket, email me and I'll put my email address in here as we speak. But also, we will record them, we will share them, and we may very well run the sessions again, repeat the sessions, because there's been a lot of demand, hasn't there, John?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. All right. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for your time. Be safe wherever you are. Let's hope that the lockdowns are over soon, and have a great week. Thank you very much.
Stay safe, everybody.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys. Thank you. Bye,
Thanks,
Ranjit.
Thank you. Great job. Thank you.
Cheers, Christina. Thank you.
Christina.
Bye, Lisa Marie.
Bye, Lisa Marie.
Bye-bye. Great to meet you. Lovely. Oliver, thank you. Bye, Eva. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Eva. You're a speechwriter.
See you, Oliver.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oliver, great to see you.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you. Thanks for all your articles.
And keep healthy in these days.
Yeah. You too. Absolutely.
Stay safe, happy, and healthy.